Good day, everyone. Scooter coming to you live from the Granville Guitars World Headquarters here in lovely St. Petersburg, Florida. Today is Wednesday, November the 6th, 2019, and I'm fighting a really gnarly cold, so you'll have to excuse me if I sound funny or if I get a little confused at certain times. Today on the bench we want to talk about this beautiful Ibanez Universe guitar, which belongs to our good friend Daniel Vadim from Morbid Angel. He and Scotty stopped by yesterday to drop this guitar off to have some modifications done to it in preparation for the latest Morbid Angel tour, which begins, I'm looking at my iPad here, excuse me, begins Friday, November the 22nd in Dallas, Texas at the Gas Monkey. Continues to Austin, Mesa, Arizona, Santa Ana, California, San Diego, San Jose, Salt Lake City, Denver, Omaha, Minneapolis, Joliet, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Reading, Richmond, Charlotte, Atlanta, Tampa, and ending up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida at the Revolution Live on Saturday, December the 21st. Just Google for their tour dates. If you are interested, get yourself some tickets and go see Morbid Angel. Watain is also on the bill, guaranteed to be a very intense night of music. Getting back to this guitar here, Daniel would like to make this guitar over into something more akin to what Trey has used throughout the years. So he has acquired directly from Ibanez, they made this for him, a plain black pickguard. And that is going on there. Okay, then we have the correct DiMarzio pickups, also in green. Okay, we've got I think it's the Blaze, which goes in the middle. Yes, there it is right there. And it doesn't have the models on the boxes, and I can't remember what they are, but I know they're the proper DiMarzio pickups in green. And he also has green knobs and green switch tip. So we're going to move this over for him. Also, we're going to do a setup on it, and he and I had a discussion about the setting of the bridge on these guitars. Now, a lot of guys do their bridges, I hope you can see if I zoom in here on this, do their bridges like this one, where the plate is flat. Okay, that is not how this bridge was intended to work, and my apologies if the idiots next door are making a bunch of hammering noises. Can't be helped. It really is supposed to sit right about there. You can see where that gap is, where the fine-tuning screw lives. The gap underneath there, that should be parallel to the top of the guitar. It should really sit like this. The reasons for this are myriad, but mostly it has to do with the knife edges, the bearing edges on these posts. Okay, in order for these to be useful over the long term, these machined hardened steel bearing edges have to be parallel to the post, and that means a perfect parallelogram to the post, dead level. Okay, if you have it back into the cavity like that, that bearing edge is not level anymore, and as a result, over time, in much quicker fashion than it would be otherwise, those bearing edges will wear out, and eventually the bridge will not return to pitch as well, and those bearing edges will have to be replaced. So Daniel and I talked about this for a while yesterday, and he asked me to set it up the way that I like to set it up, which is to factory specs. So that's all that we're doing with this guitar today. If this kind of thing interests you, stay tuned. Alright, here we are, day 2. Got the pickups installed and new strings. We did a new output jack. Basically got it all spiffed up, ready to go out on the road. The new switch tip that Daniel provided for us did not fit this Ibanez switch, and that's I only stock old school switches here. I didn't have an Ibanez switch in stock, so we had to go with the original black switch tip. But we have the DiMarzio pickups installed. Now, if you weren't aware of how the switching works, it's actually quite simple. In the number 5 position, I would call it number 5, you have this pickup humbucking by itself. In the 4 position, you get this coil of the bridge pickup combined with this coil of the middle pickup. Obviously, in the center position, middle pickup by itself. When you get to the number 2 position, middle pickup combined with this coil of the neck pickup, and finally the neck pickup in humbucking mode, like that. That can't be done with an old school switch like I typically stock here. It has to use their special switch. And you'll also see that the bridge saddles came out quite a bit different than they were. The intonation was pretty much off most of the way, but that was to be expected because I was also changing the angle of the bridge. Hopefully you can see there from the side. That is the proper arrangement for an Ibanez edge tremolo. Let me see if I can zoom in there and make it focus. It may focus, maybe it will. If you can see right in there, there's a gap, and there should be. Okay, this edge here is not supposed to be flat to the body. A lot of guys set it that way, and it will work that way, but the problem there is that these bearing edges in here, and I think I explained that in the last segment yesterday, you'll have to forgive me, those bearing edges need to be perpendicular to the post in order for them to stay clean and sharp and working properly. So we've got Daniel all set up there. He uses a D'Addario set gauged 9 to 54. It's the standard 7-string set that D'Addario sells. The Morbid Angel uses an E flat tuning. Okay, so that would be well, I'm thinking of basically everything's tuned to E flat, and this would be A sharp on the bottom, or B flat if you prefer. And we've got it set up that way and intonated. Now, a couple of words on some things. First of all, don't ask me if I'm going to be doing a bench report on one of Trey's guitars. Probably not going to happen. Trey is a fine setup technician. He's been doing his own guitars for years. He's very good at it. He knows exactly what he wants, and so he rarely has need for my services. Although I have done a bit of wiring for Trey on a few of his guitars in the past. I think things that were broken or just needed replacing or whatever. Oh, we also put a new output jack on this guitar, by the way. The old one was actually physically not tight anymore. The contacts were actually able to rotate inside of it, so it was not getting good contact, and we went and replaced it. So back to what I was just talking about. There will be more than likely no bench report on any of Trey's guitars because I never see his guitars. He does them himself. What else was I going to say? Oh, a few words about double locking tremolos in general when I'm doing a setup. There are a few things I do right off the bat that can be very helpful if you're frustrated with any tremolo for that matter, but a double locking setup in particular. A lot of things that people will neglect. On a bolt-on guitar, the first thing I check is the neck bolts. Make sure those bad boys are tight. Very, very tight. Because if that connection there is loose or wobbly, it's not going to return to pitch. And that's all there is to that. One of the other things that I do, and this is with all guitars, is to check the tuning, or the tuning pegs rather. These guys right here. Okay, make sure those are tight. Don't cramp them down too hard because you can strip those out, but make sure they're nice and snug. If those are able to move back and forward, even on a locking guitar, if those are allowed to move back and forward, because you have to get the guitar stable before you lock this down, so it's important that these are tight. Okay, next up, The locking nut itself, whether it screws from the top or from the other side like this one is, make sure those screws are tight. If you look down at your locking tremolo to the nut and you're wobbling it back and forth, and you notice that the nut is actually moving back and forth in its slot, that's not going to stay in tune, is it? Probably not. Even when this is locked down, if this moves back and forth, this has to be stationary. Okay? One of the other mistakes I see made is this panic bar, this tension bar right here. Setting that too low. That needs to be carefully set, because when you're trying to string up a locking tremolo and get it stable, and as I said previously, you've got to have it completely stable before you lock this down. Don't rely on this as, oh, I can get it there with the fine tuners. I set up a locking tremolo so that it's completely stable before these are locked. That way when they're locked down, it's really stable. But anyway, this torsion bar here, do not put it down too far. Okay, it doesn't need to be jammed down. If you can see an actual angle leading the strings underneath that tension bar, that's too much. There's a very, very gentle break angle there. If you screw it down too far, these locking nuts are going to have trouble doing what they're supposed to do. There needs to be a little bit of slack on this end, not necessarily slack, but a little bit of space for these to clamp down. And if this is jammed all the way down to the body, that's going to prevent that, and this is going to be a source of tuning irritation that's going to drive you crazy. Another double locking unique thing you got to do. When you are tightening these screws, and this goes double for the ones at the other end, I use a T-wrench, this Chesco T-wrench. This is my main tool for tightening these 3mm screws. When you're tightening these bad boys, finger tight. What that means is grasp the wrench. Here, let me zoom out. Grasp the wrench with fingers up like this and tighten it like this until it stops. Oh, get it up there where you can see. Finger tight. Do not grab it like this. Finger tight until it stops, and then go perhaps another eighth of an inch or eighth of a turn, like the distance say between 1 and 2 o'clock, and stop right there. Don't go any farther. I see a lot of these stripped out. I see a lot of nut shelves stripped out. I see an awful lot of saddles stripped out because people have gotten all Magilla Gorilla on those things. And what happens is, after they're clamped down and the guitar gets used for anywhere from a week to 6 months with those strings on there, these little bad boys will actually work their way tighter. They get themselves tighter. That's why when you go to loosen them, you'll stick a wrench in there and it'll go crack when you're loosening it, because it's actually worked its way tighter from where you tightened it. So be careful for all of that stuff. Also, I like to lubricate and clean all important moving parts that are not locked down. Okay, and what that means down here at the bridge side, the posts, right up in here, and the edge is really nice because there's this little tray in there. I like to use a Teflon lubricant for all of my lubricating needs for this stuff. Let's see if I can zoom out here and I'll show you what I use. It's a product that's called Super Lube. Comes in a tube like this, and I just take a veterinary needle and put it on the end so I can get it wherever I want to. A little dab will do you, and by a little dab I mean a little tiny dab, so that stuff goes a long way. That's what I use for lubricating, and I will put some of that right there where the posts meet the bearing edges, and work that tremolo, work that bad boy. Work it back and forth a whole bunch. That's the only way to arrive at stability with a locking tremolo, or with any tremolo for that matter. You have to have patience. One of these days maybe I'll do a full video of how I do this sort of stuff, but this is just a few general tips. Also, on the back side of the guitar, another place you definitely want to lubricate, and I've already put the back cover on, but the string claw, everywhere the strings mount, where they hook into the block on the one end, you got to have some of that lube, that super lube. Okay, then the other end, the the hoop part that goes around the string claw itself. A little bit of lube in there. I even lubricate the screws where they meet the string claw. All of that stuff has to return to a same position every time that tremolo is used, or it will never stay stable. So there's just a couple of little Floyd Rose, and well, most of this stuff is applicable to tremolos in general. A few little tips on how to keep this stuff stable. Once again, this is guitar for a good friend Daniel Vadim Bond, playing with Morbid Angel. They're preparing for a US tour, and I mentioned the dates at the head of this video. If you want to rewind back there, just Google those guys, catch them out on the road. They've got Watain with them this year on this particular tour. Should prove to be a really intense show, and I recommend you check it out if you're so inclined. That's all I know for today. If you have any questions about anything we do here at Granville Guitars, seek us out on the web at www.granvilleguitars.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram, and the blog, A View from the Granville Bench, over at WordPress. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to one another.